His injury now season ending and affecting the 2023 NFL season. There are three burning questions going through my mind. We'll talk about them.
You are Locked On Cardinals, your daily Arizona Cardinals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. Alex Clancy here. Follow me on Twitter at Clancy's Corner. Follow the podcast at Locked On AZ Cards. Thank you for making Locked On Cardinals your first listen each and every day, free and available on all platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with the most props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So it's been a really interesting last 48 hours. Terrible injury for Kyler Murray. Hope nothing but the speediest of health to him as a human being, and not just the avatar of the Arizona Cardinals. But there are some situations that have arisen that have bred some questions. And not just dealing with 2022, which seems to be a foregone conclusion. The Arizona Cardinals are going to have a top 5 or top 6 pick in the draft in 2023. Looking towards the future is something that's imperative. And there are storylines that may have been jet fueled to happen a little bit faster or not at all. Where do you look in the draft? And do you look to trade a high prized and paid player on this team for draft capital? Because chances are, even though, the traditional recovery time is 6 to 9 months, which could get Kyler Murray back in October or early November, who knows? But there are questions that need to be asked. And as I said, and nobody predicted Kyler Murray getting injured, but if the Cardinals lost on Monday night, there would be some very uncomfortable conversations that need to be had pretty much immediately. And I'll placate that a little bit, but I will look towards the future today on today's episode of Locked On Cardinals to talk about 3 questions that I have for the 2023 season. And I'm fascinated. This is one of the greatest social psychology experiments ever, the Arizona Cardinals. Because you never know what's going to happen. You never know if they're going to stay the course. You never know if they're going to go rogue. You never know if they're going to do things more traditionally, which traditionally they don't do. So the first thing that I'm looking towards in 2023 is, will this speed up the process of Kliff Kingsbury and Steve Keim being put under hotter light with their respective positions? Will Michael Bidwell look himself in the mirror and say, you know what? It's time. No, Steve Keim and Kliff Kingsbury are not responsible for all the injuries that the Cardinals have had this year. No, they're not. And no, nobody could have seen Kyler Murray, although people like to gripe at him for being hobbled throughout seasons. Nobody saw this happening, because you never see this happening until it happens. So no, none of this specific situation is the fault of Steve Keim or Kliff Kingsbury. Let's just get that clear. And they are now in a situation, the Arizona Cardinals are, namely Michael Bidwell, are in a situation where you're going to not have your star quarterback for at least the first handful of games next season. Okay? I'm not a doctor. He could be back week 1, 6 months from now. Let's do it together. January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. So say September would be the 6 to 9 month window. Okay? We'll see. And these are all predictive conversations here, because we're looking in 2023 and not for the 2022 season, because right now it's almost more important to see what the future is going to hold. So does this shorten the timeline for the removal of posts from Kliff Kingsbury or Steve Keim? I don't know the answer. I'm just posing the question. There's 2 different ways Michael Bidwell can look at it, as I mentioned. One, say, you know what? Injury-riddled season. Let's give them another shot. Let's have that extension actually kick in before I remove them from post. Okay, that's one instance. If that's the case, you're going to be looking at Steve Keim making a full slate of draft picks, signing Hollywood Brown to an extension, DeAndre Hopkins most likely to an extension, Zach Allen to an extension, Byron Murphy most likely to an extension, and also drafting a lot of players next year. A 1, a 2, a 3, and I think they have 2 compensatory picks, but one of them they traded for Cody Ford. I believe I need to double check on that. And then they have their slate of picks for the most part. Do you trust Steve Keim to make those draft picks? So that's 1. And then 2, do you trust Kliff Kingsbury to do something that he's never done before as a head coach, which is elevate a team to the level of actually being able to win during the second half of the season and into the postseason? Do you, Michael Bidwell, trust that Steve Keim and Kliff Kingsbury will do things that they've legitimately never done? That's one way, which is the way we looked like we were going before Kyler Murray went down for the season-ending injury. Number 2, do you, Michael Bidwell, look in the mirror and say, you know what? It's time. Kliff, Steve, see ya. Move Steve Keim to a senior role with the team and get Kliff Kingsbury on his merry way. They're both going to get paid handsomely for the contract extensions they've gotten. And you move on tomorrow. So you know what? The season's lost. Have Vance Joseph take over as interim head coach. Do some talent evaluation from now through the end of the season. And start fresh with a new regime, with a new culture, with a new everything come 2023, regardless of when Kyler Murray comes back. Look at what's happened in Detroit. Look at what's happened in East Rutherford with the Jets I'm talking about, with Dan Campbell and Robert Saleh, respectively. It didn't matter about wins and losses their first year as head coach. It was the culture shifting in front of our very eyes. I don't know if Detroit Lions fans have ever had as much fun as they are right now. Ever. Any of the Matthew Stafford years. Ever. Calvin Johnson. Doesn't matter. I don't know if they've ever had more fun and had more trust in their team than they do right now. Ask Matt Derry, one of the greatest we have here on the Locked On Podcast Network, Locked On Lions. Ask him about that. Look at what the culture is changing into with those 2 respective teams. The Cardinals have the ability to do that right now on a shorter time span with the ability to have a hard reset come 2023 draft. New person drafting the players, new person coaching the players, and move the hell on into what could potentially be a winning way. Will Michael Bidwell do it? Who the hell knows? Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. Thanks for hanging out live here on a Wednesday. Coming up next, my second most exciting, riveting, interesting storyline of 2023, sparked by Kyler Murray going down with a season-ending injury. I will talk about that next, right here on Locked On Cardinals. This episode of Locked On Cardinals is brought to you by LinkedIn. So LinkedIn does a whole bunch of things right. Most things right, if not all things right. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business, though. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. So you make a job post. It's easy. Create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. Then add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And also, this episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible they're just rolling out new podcasts, okay? They're releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love. That's why you'll be able to find a sneak peek of Think Like a Champion available right now as a bonus episode on Locked On Presents. Think Like a Champion is a brand new podcast from Russell Wilson and Audible. Russ is a champion on the field, but off of it, we really know the grind on the path to greatness. Each episode features interviews with Olympic medalists, NFL stars, and business leaders. Hosts will swap stories and share proven mental techniques that have gotten the world's most elite performers across the finish line and beyond. Available for free on Audible or wherever you get your podcasts. Head over to Locked On Presents for a sneak peek of Think Like a Champion, or catch the full series available anywhere you get your podcast. Available everywhere now. Audible, get in the game. A couple storylines have birthed since Kyler Murray went down terribly with a torn ACL, which will keep him out for the rest of this season and potentially a chunk of next season. Number one, does this shorten the timeline for a decision to be made for Kliff Kingsbury and Steve Keim? I don't know. I'm just posing the question. Number two, this one, I tweeted this out, I erased it. I tweeted it, I erased it. I tweeted, I erased it. Like I did it 3 or 4 times because I'm like, this is the last thing that you want to see happen. And unfortunately, if Kyler Murray were to miss time in 2023, it's a question that needs to be asked because this is the last person that I want to see not an Arizona Cardinal. But this is also the player on the Arizona Cardinals that may garner the most trade, get the most trade assets back. Should the Cardinals trade DeAndre Hopkins? And I don't say this as clickbait. I don't say this as, oh, it's Wednesday. I don't have anything to talk about. Let's go after the best receiver that the Cardinals have and a top 5 receiver in the league and arguably a top, 15 receiver of all time, in my opinion. I love DeAndre Hopkins. And he was one of my favorite receivers, if not my favorite, before the Cardinals traded for him. But if you look at it like this, think calm, okay? Chill, take a breath, stop screaming expletives at me, and just think about this rationally, okay? Think about it rationally. If Kyler Murray is out, okay? Say Kyler Murray misses the first month of the season, and a team offers a first and a third for DeAndre Hopkins. That would give the Cardinals 2 first-round picks, a second, 3 thirds, and a whole bunch in the later rounds. That way, instead of having $20+ million a year to give to DeAndre Hopkins, and this pains me. This pains me to even think about discussing, but you're not trading Hollywood Brown. You just traded a first-round pick for him. Like, there's no way. There's no way. Plus, you're not trading Hollywood Brown. So if you don't want to assign $50 million a year ballpark, between $40 and $50 million a year in the wide receiver room between 2 players, when you want to extend Zach Allen, you want to extend Byron Murphy, although not as impactful as those 2 wide receivers, it's just a question that needs to be discussed. Would you offer a first and third for DeAndre Hopkins? Or would you accept a first and third round pick for DeAndre Hopkins at the end of the season if you know that Kyler Murray's not going to be ready for the 2023 start to the season? You've got to think about it. That's all. You've got to think about it. Now, if the Cardinals fire Kliff and Keim and bring in Sean Payton or something, they're going to have to trade for Sean Payton. Just keep that in mind. So they're going to have to give up picks for Sean Payton, which I don't know if the Cardinals, it would be biting the bullet initially to get Sean Payton in, but it'd be 100% worth it. So in that case, you keep DeAndre Hopkins. But if it's the same regime, I would think about it. I would think about it. I wouldn't say do it. I love DeAndre Hopkins, but it's a fool's errand, in my opinion, to not go over every possible outcome and move to make this team better for the future. I want DeAndre Hopkins to retire in Arizona Cardinal, but that also doesn't mean that with how Steve Keim has built this roster, benefiting from another first-round pick could catapult this team. We don't know, but it's something that needs to be discussed. It's one of those things that after Kyler Murray went down, it's one of the first things I thought of. It's like, do they fire sale? What do they do? DeAndre Hopkins was the first name that popped in my head because he's the most important offensive player, in my opinion, not named Kyler Murray. You got to think about it. And it sucks, but you got to think about it. Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. One more. I'm going to go very short on the last segment because there's going to be so much time to talk about this topic. But again, it's something that needs to be discussed with Kyler Murray going down. Where do the Cardinals go forward this time with the draft? Locked On Cardinals, your team every day. BetOnline.net. This episode of Locked On Cardinals is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and World Cup. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use a mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. And also I get to talk about favorite local sponsor here at Locked On Cardinals, My Solar Nerd. Folks, listen, if you live in a sunny state like ours and you're getting people who are out of state that are offering you free solar, they're most likely using misleading tactics and end up overcharging homeowners. My Solar Nerd's mission is simple, okay? They're local. They don't do that. They help you get the best solar system to fit your needs. The guys at MySolarNerd.com are local and understand the nuances of going solar in Arizona, and they've been doing this for a while and understand that an educated customer is a happy one. Their no-pressure approach will make sure all your questions get answered. Our listeners will get $50 on an Amazon gift card when they book a no-commitment evaluation. This promotion is only for our listeners that are homeowners, so keep that in mind. Visit MySolarNerd.com and select Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us section. Make the switch to solar on your terms. Start your research process by visiting MySolarNerd.com today and show Locked On some love by letting them know we sent you. Folks, going solar doesn't need to be complicated. MySolarNerd.com makes it easy. All right. This sucks. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. Not this, us, you and me talking right now. Kyler Murray going down. It's tough. I mean, you feel bad for him. You feel terrible for him. You feel terrible for him. You know, it was a tough season. Could have finished it on a high note, and just the non-contact injury got him. It does spark a lot of questions. One, will this shorten the timeline for Kliff Kingsbury and Steve Keim to be removed from their post if that were to be a thing? Or is this just going to be a scapegoat for, oh no, it was injuries this year, they'll be fine next year? You'd think it's going to be the latter. The former is probably more prudent, but you know, this is the world in which we live, in the Michael Bidwell umbrella of ineptitude at times. Should they trade DeAndre Hopkins if a first and a third is offered for him? Like, this is not clickbait topics. These are not clickbait topics. I feel like that is something that truly needs to be discussed. Would you trade DeAndre Hopkins for a first-round pick? If Kyler Murray misses time in the 2023 season and you can get a stud wide receiver, a stud offensive lineman, or defensive tackle, is that more beneficial for the future of this team than DeAndre Hopkins? I don't know the answer, but that's a discussion that needs to be had. And then number 3, who do the Cardinals draft in the first round? What position do the Cardinals draft in the first round? One of the first mocks that came out from Pro Football Focus had the Cardinals taking Bijan Robinson at 14 overall running back out of Texas. He's going to be an all-world running back. He's going to be an all-world running back. And you know what? If the Cardinals would have eaten their vegetables, maybe you'd be able to draft him. But Steve Keim has never eaten his vegetables in the draft. He's never drafted an offensive lineman, not since 2015 in the first 2 rounds. So what position do you take if the Cardinals draft top 5? You take defensive tackle? You take a corner? You take an offensive lineman? What do you do? And unfortunately, very unfortunately for the Cardinals, the last 2 seasons in the top 15, top 20 was stocked with top offensive lineman talent. Last 3 years, top offensive lineman talent. And Steve Keim decided to go Isaiah Simmons, Zaven Collins, Hollywood Brown. So he punted on what was very deep offensive lineman drafts. So now there's a couple mocks out. Todd McShay has the Cardinals taking a defensive tackle from Clemson. And another mock that I saw from, I can't remember who it was, but from a high-ranking mock draft official had the Cardinals taking a corner out of Georgia. So the Cardinals still have the same needs that they did at the end of last season. Offensive line, edge rush, interior defensive line, corner. They still have the issues because Steve Keim didn't address any of them during the draft or in the offseason as a whole. So who should the Cardinals draft? Offensive lineman, okay? But you can't reach if you're that high unless you trade back on an offensive lineman that's lesser than just because you have a top pick when you punted on drafting an offensive lineman the last 3 seasons when you should have. So it's going to be very interesting to see what's going to happen in the first round with the Arizona Cardinals. They may have 2 picks. Who knows what they're going to do with the talent that they have now? Who knows what will come? Who knows if Steve Keim will be making the draft picks? But I will leave you with this. If Steve Keim is at his post that he currently sits in and he is responsible for making those draft picks, buckle up because it's going to get weird. Alex Clancy, Locked On Cardinals. I will talk to you for our crossover Thursday